Hello, my name is Peter Reynolds and welcome to another YouTube version of a Gage Guild library programme. By any standard, the late Bob Alderman was a master craftsman when it came to 7mm scale modelling. Many of his railways in miniature have featured in the Model Railway Press, and the layout you are about to see featured in the January 2007 issue of Railway Modeller. It is an excellent example of the level of detail that can be included in a relatively modest space in the scale. The scenic area is 12 feet by 3 feet 9 inches, and the fiddle yard increases the overall length to 19 feet. The railway is also still in existence, having moved to Canada in 2022.
Welcome to Albion Quarry. The layout is a fictitious branch off the Bletchley-Verney Junction line. It depicts the end of a line at a Portland stone quarry. Portland stone at this location is fact, but it was never quarried. It has been assumed that the quarry is owned by one of the Portland companies in Dorset and has recently converted to locomotive haulage. The quarry and branch are independent and only meet within the works. The stone comes from the quarry and travels to the works, where both finished work and rough stone blocks are transferred for distribution to the wider world. The object of the layout is to illustrate the quarrying of dimension stone, that is, a stone intended for construction or elaborate mason's work. Various items of quarrying machinery are shown. Some are unique to Portland. The work shows an example of this in an early circular saw. There is a mason's yard where detailed stone cutting is carried out. The small wagons on the quarry line are based on the horse-drawn examples of the Portland Merchants Railway. The layout is wired for conventional DC control using gauge master controllers and tortoise point motors. All the structures are scratch built, mainly from plastic card. Rolling stock is all kit built. The small quarry wagons are cast from white metal from my own patterns. Two different coupling systems are used: Alex Jackson's on the branch and HOKD's in the quarry. This is the quarry, illustrating some essential features. A typical derrick crane for lifting the stone blocks, a face shovel, though often not used in the quarries, and a particular device at the back with a large boiler which is called a channeler. This is a machine I'm particularly fond of. It's based on a unique photograph of one on Portland. It's a device for cutting a slot in the stone bed alongside it. It is in fact a self-propelled saw. First of all, the derrick crane. This has been built from photographs of typical examples on Portland. Not all of them were steam operated, but it gives a good chance to avoid making any mechanism because of the corrugated iron cab. Main construction is in basswood with plasticard and metal detail added. The channeler is entirely scratch built with the exception of a Duncan vertical boiler. It took some unravelling from the single photograph available, but essentially there is a small steam engine which drives a crankshaft, and from this crankshaft there are two crossheads, one at each end, either one of which drives the saw, and this moves up and down in a vertical sense, cutting into the rock beneath it and alongside. But at the same time there is a small gearbox on there which drives one of the sets of wheels so it moves slowly along the rails, and these rails were obviously a temporary arrangement that could be moved easily around the quarry. The face shovel is from the Andy Duncan range and simply sits here out of use, and as you note, weeds are beginning to grow around it. They were rarely used, perhaps only clearing overburden from the quarry before starting on the rock. The quarry railway facilities consist of a coal stage and oil tank, fuel oil for the Ruston shunter and coal for the Sentinel parked up in the shed. There's a water tower, again for the steam locomotive, but also to provide water for the machines that cut the stone as well, to lubricate the cut. There is an engine shed for storing the locomotives, and inside there is also a small workbench to provide some means of maintenance for the locomotives. This is a fairly new construction in terms of the railway, because originally these lines were worked by horse. It's only on the model as a latter day modernisation plan that we have locomotive propulsion. The fuel stave is scratch built by and large, decorated with cast coal sacks, real coal. The fuel tank, I believe, came from an old Triang 4mm tanker, but I must say it's lost in the depths of time, the source of that. And at the front, where the chap is standing, is the standpipe for watering the locomotives. The quarry rolling stock comprises mostly of the small flat wagons. These are based on wagons that ran on the Merchants Railway on Portland. The gauge of these on Portland was 4'6", so in fact the gauge here being 32mm is exactly right. Some of the wagons have loads and some are empty. This is part of the plan for during operation, is that full loads will come up out of the off-scene working quarry, go down to the works and then be exchanged through a hole in the back scene for empty ones for the return trip. Originally these wagons were horse-drawn, but say we have modernised and have locomotives to haul the traffic now. The little Ruston, the origins of the kit are unknown to me. It was a set of etches that turned up at Gildex. This is the main locomotive. The Sentinel outside the shed is the second locomotive and is rarely used on the model. It's simply set decoration, you might say, standing in the shed entrance. This is from an impetus kit. These two wagons, you may say, are flights of fancy. The red one being a gunpowder van to supply powder to the quarry for blasting, and the second one is entirely a work of fiction as a means of taking things into the quarry. All the quarry wagons employ HOKD couplings. As the wheelbase is so short, they work very well on the 2-foot radii curves of this part of the layout. There is a small adjustment to the dropper to improve the clearance with the top of the ballast, but apart from that they're just mounted directly onto the body as they would be on an HO truck. Next to the quarry is the first part of the workshop. It's where the saws size the stone and some finishing work is undertaken under cover. There are two saws sitting at the back of the shed. One, a circular saw, sitting in the shade here somewhat, The model is based on one I found in a quarry on the Isle of Purbeck. Dates from about 1930. The second saw, sitting at the back of the workshop again, and again in shadow I'm afraid, is a reciprocating saw. Electric motor driving a crankshaft and then a blade which goes backwards and forwards and is slowly lowered down through the block. This is one of the oldest types of saws and is effectively what is a mechanised saw of a hand saw, one with a man at each end to saw through the blocks. The cutting medium originally was sand and water on the blade, little blocks in the blade driving the sand to and fro as it cut down. Modern saws now use diamond tips. Here in the workshop too are cranes. One small travelling crane, hand operated, and a small lifting crane to manoeuvre blocks where the mason is working on gravestones. Also in the scene are a number of figures at work. Chap splitting a stone block using wedges to break it apart. Another poor soul working away to move a block whilst being berated by the foreman, and in the background the apprentice tidying up. Not all the stone was worked on site. Other monumental stonemasons would take delivery of stone in their various workplaces, and here is a lorry load ready to leave. This building is the transshipment shed. Here stone is brought in from the quarry on the small wagons. It is worked on for further delivery or onward shipment, and this is the point where the main line, or in effect the branch, has a siding going to the works to be loaded. The transshipment shed features a large overhead travelling crane. This is based on photos and drawings of a Stoddart and Pitt crane in Bath. But apart from based on, it is somewhat a made up item, but I think it is convincing. The final set of buildings are the offices, workshops and powerhouse for the works. It's an interesting model to make, taking three shapes around a corner. I do not like uniform buildings, so this was a challenge and an interesting one to make for me. And to get it right, I initially made a model in corrugated cardboard put together with a hot glue gun, and as a result of which what you see is not what I originally had in mind. There were certain features I had which just didn't look right, so making a mock-up was very much worthwhile. All the buildings you see are made in plastic card using either 1 to 3 millimeter plastic card as a base, and then overlay in plain for planking, or corrugated or stone or brick to suit the application. What I've aimed to do is to get an organic look of something that has evolved over the years, so pieces have grown up around the site as it evolved, so it changes from scene to scene as you look through it. Before the first train arrives, a word on the scenery. All the quarry work faces, the stone faces, have been built up using corrugated cardboard, cut into strips, folded on the corrugations, and then set into the scene using a hot glue gun. This gives the blocky shape. These have then been surfaced with papier-mâché, torn up squares of newspaper, stuck down with PVA, and then finished with Artex. The Artex has then been coloured to get the correct colour for the stone. I did originally try to add Portland stone dust to the Artex mix with a view of using it as a colour. This didn't work. It turned the Artex rock hard, but it was an amusing occasion getting the stone out of the quarry. I arrived with my bucket, spoke to the quarry manager and said, "Could I have a bucket full of stone dust, please?" "Yes," he says, "how much would you like?" So I showed him my bucket, and he said, "You sure you don't want a JCB bucket full?" "No, this is all I want." He was rather disappointed, because at that time it was a waste material that they couldn't get rid of. Notwithstanding that I couldn't use the stone dust to colour the Artex directly, it has subsequently been used further ground up with a pestle and mortar and added to PVA medium to turn it into the pigment of paint. So in fact a lot of things are painted with Portland stone dust. From the quarry's earlier life, when there was horse-drawn stock around, this just shows a little area with stone sets to support the rails with the path between them where the horses worked. This perch has been abandoned as it was not suitable to have the track relaid for locomotive use, but it serves to illustrate. Such greenery as there is on the layout was originally based on woodland scenics and green scene materials. Subsequently, this has been overtopped with a further addition of static grass from the Heki range. This grass does have a tendency to be of a somewhat bright colour, alpine meadows, rather than the some more parched UK grasses, so to change the colour of it once it has been applied, it has been airbrushed with warning panel yellow and Doncaster green to change the tones. There are a number of small trees on the layout. These either have wire trunks and branches, or some of it is forest in a box retouched with green scene foliage on top. Other parts have used postiche covered in a variety of green scene products to represent brambly bushes and such like. Local Bletchley engine comes with pickup goods. Part of the train comprises a gunpowder van. This is to be delivered to the works. First the van and the guard's van are separated from the train. and then the gunpowder van is taken down towards the works, where the van is uncoupled. Alex Jackson couplings are used on all the mainline stock. They're very discreet, and when they're working properly it's like magic. Besides which, as the layout is normally operated from the rear, it would be impossible to lean over to operate 3-link couplings. The remaining vehicles are detached from the locomotive. As there are loaded wagons waiting outside the works, the loco first comes down to collect those. Having collected the wagons, now comes down and collects the gunpowder van, put that into the siding in place of the other wagons. Coal tank isn't the ideal locomotive for shunting, as it has screw reverse rather than lever. The next job, of course, is to get the guards van to the other end of the train. A bit difficult spotting the uncoupling magnets from this side of the layout. The markers, which are clear from when operating behind, are invisible. In order to shunt, locomotive must pass the signal at danger. As there is no cooling on arm, there is a board beside the track which says shunt ahead. It permits the locomotive to pass a signal at danger for the purpose of shunting. However, when departing, we have to await proper authority from the signal box down the line. In this instance, the guard who's been operating the ground frame would phone down to say, "We're ready to leave, can we have the line?" As on the main line, the quarry also treats its gunpowder wagon with care and places barrier wagons between it and the locomotive. The locomotive detaches to run around. And then departs into the working quarry. The second train of the day. Trains are usually run to the end of the line and then stopped. This gives the operator a chance to see what the fiddle yard has sent him by way of vehicles. In this case, there are two empty open wagons which are clearly destined for the works to be loaded with stone. But first the train has to be shortened so that the two wagons are become at the end of the train and can enter the works. The van beside the guard's van is also destined for the works. But not the guard's van, of course. For the benefit of the editor, we'll try that again. So a little later on, a trainload of empties. For a little variety, the sentinel will sometimes be sent to collect some odds and ends from the works. Wagons with loaded stone come in from the off-scene quarry. For safety reasons, the wagons are not propelled into the works but have to be led in by the locomotive. As they are unbraked, there's a danger of runaway. The locomotive must go first. So the locomotive now runs around the wagons. Once the wagons are in the transshipment shed, they are exchanged for empty ones behind the scenes to give the illusion that there is work going on in the works. As this wagon load is a delivery to the engine shed, the sentinel will now run around and push the wagon into the shed. The now loaded wagons in the works are collected by the final train of the day. A word on the track work. The tracking on the quarry lines is code 75 flat bottom rail spiked to plywood sleepers, with the occasional copper-clad sleeper just to help maintain the gauge. Something of a labour of love, because now it's all ballasted and painted, it doesn't really show, and perhaps could quite easily have been 100% copper-clad. The mainline track work is entirely from the C&L range. They're plain track between the points and sleepers and chairs to build up the points. These were built either on full-size templates from C&L or made up to suit myself. The three-way point in particular is an item of track work that is not in, or was not when I started, in the C&L range of templates, and for this I photocopied two different points onto transparent paper and then overlaid the two pieces of transparent paper to make up the point as you see, and then built in the usual fashion. Point control on the railway is from the ground frame. This from model signal engineering components, as is the point rodding. Just in sight behind the post, nearest post, is an Annet's key that the guard would use to open up the box to shunt the yard locally. Having an open ground frame like this on the model I think is unusual. I don't recall seeing one on anybody else's model. The usual sector plate removed from the layout, but here to show what the normal facilities are like when the layout is exhibited. Here folded up in its transport state. This way it fits entirely on one of the 4-foot boards that is the module size for the layout. And here unfolded for use. Locomotives are released and added by the mini sector plate at the far end. Entirely a hand-driven operation using fingers to ensure tracks are aligned, but frequently you do get a clatter when someone gets it wrong. The temporary alternative fiddle yard used whilst making the video, the usual sector plate one just doesn't fit in the shed and work. And here perhaps you can see the somewhat constricted space that was used in an effort to take the pictures. Here is the works transport waiting to leave. It has a load of stone for delivery to a local monumental mason for turning into tombstones, garden gnomes, whatever. This is a view into the working end of the Challenger. Single cylinder steam engine can be made out and its drive onto the crankshaft. This crankshaft has a crosshead device at each end to which a saw could be mounted to cut a vertical slot into the stone. There is a worm gearbox driving down onto a set of the rail wheels which would slowly propel it along the track. A view of the derrick cab. Such detail as you can see is all the detail that I know about it. The interior works for the steam engine are unknown. There are no pictures to show how this goes. A view into the engine shed interior, but of particular interest on this is the stonework. Though plastic hard, it has been finished with a painted surface of Artex, which has been sealed with an emulsion paint and then finished in the appropriate colours. The Artex and emulsion serve to fill any gaps and provide additional texture. Another view into the shed interior. A closer view of the fuel and coal store. The fuel tank is, I think, an old Triang tank wagon body, discovered in the scrap box, or the box of bits that this may be useful one day. The coal sacks and shovel, I think, are from the Duncan range. Little scratch built pump to pump the fuel oil into the diesel, and a scattering of loose coal. A closer view of the ground frame. Note to the left of the guard on the floor there is the Annet's key. This will be used to unlock the box when a train arrives so that the yard can be shunted. The lever frame itself is from MSE components, and the rest has been made up from some ship's railing standards and a tiny print of the track plan. A view across to the head shunt and its retaining wall from the works. This is a view that's not often seen except by the operator. A similar view, this time looking down the track towards some parked wagons. A view into the works. Number of stone items awaiting packing and for dispatch can be made out in the gloom. And again, lurking in the works, the rust and diesel. This is a view of the mason's yard, in particular one of the smaller overhead cranes for manoeuvring the blocks onto the saw trolleys. This view shows the foreman perhaps berating one of his workmen for sitting down on the job. In the background is a bird bath and a sundial. This view into the gloom of the yard shows the small circular saw. This is modelled on one in a friend's quarry in Purbeck. It dates from about 1930. Again, another view into the gloom, this time one of the masons working on some tombstones. A view across the tracks into the mason's yard, giving a feeling for the general clutter of the area. And this, a closer view of the foreman, bird bath, etc. Here we have the neighbouring landowner looking over the fence. Perhaps he's contemplating the encroachment of the quarry onto his land, or perhaps contemplating the sale of some of his land to enable the quarry to expand. Just a view into one of the odd corners, gunpowder van parked up and some background clutter. Another odd corner with the Ruston parked up in the works. These three views, this view of some of the old wagons no longer in use, wheels have been stripped off and the wooden framework piled up behind the engine shed. These in fact are the early models I made for these wagons in basswood, but in wood they proved to be far too light to operate successfully. Perhaps the load would have added weight, but an empty wagon there was simply no room to put any significant weight in, so rather than discarding them, they've become scenic paraphernalia. These are quarry dogs, loosely linked hooks that under gravity grip into a block and enable it to be lifted on a crane. These work in model form as well as in reality. The block is suspended. This is a quarry train running down the incline from the quarry into the works. A view I regret it also includes some of the boxes stored in the shed with the layout. This is the engine driver's bicycle propped up against the shed. It is in fact a lost wax casting that I purchased on the occasion when there was the O-Gauge event in Nancy some years ago. Possibly one of the few items for sale there that was affordable. Again, a similar view looking back with the bicycle in the foreground and other bits in the background. A general view of the shed here. The gentleman stood outside is beside the small water column used for topping up the tank of the Sentinel. And another view of the shed interior. This view is across the road into the works. Another lorry here departing with some monumental masonry. This has either been into the works for repair or the addition of some more lettering. This is a view of the works looking across from the ground frame. Parked up outside are wagons loaded awaiting dispatch.